After the break now, I hope you're feeling all refreshed. Final session. We're exploring from conflict to recovery, the role of museums in conflict, reconciliation and peace building. And our moderator this afternoon is my fellow trustee on the ICOM UK board, Hannah Crowdy. Hannah began her museum career in 2002. How did we say that in those days? 2002, that's the... And she's worked at National Museums Northern Ireland since 2009. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. As head of curatorial, Hannah leads on collections development and research, and she oversees the exhibition education programs. She plays a leading role in strategic activity relating to contested histories and peace building in Northern Ireland. And those of you who came to our Belfast conference a couple of years ago know how knowledgeable Hannah is about this, because she organized that entire conference, which was about building bridges at that time as well. She also devised and is steering her organization's program of work to decolonize its museums and collections. A previous member of the Ethics Committee for the Museums Association, she's currently on the boards of ICOM UK and the Lyric Theatre in Belfast. Thanks, Hannah, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Christian. And as Christian has said, I work in Northern Ireland. And pertinent to this session, I think Northern Ireland is often looked to as a successful example of peace building and building a post-conflict society. But I would say that 28 years on, believe it or not, from the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, we can attest to how this work during times of conflict and post-conflict is complex, it's sensitive, and absolutely it's always a work in progress, and we can never, ever take peace for granted. So this is a really important session today, and speaking about the role of museums in conflict, reconciliation and peace building, we have three excellent speakers speaking on very different topics, looking at globally what this means. So our first speaker is Michael Mohammed. He's Director of International Relations at MUSEM, the Museum of European and Mediterranean Civilizations. And his talk is called Shared Sacred Sites, a case study of diplomatic space for intercultural dialogue. And he's going to be talking about an exhibition that has become a touring exhibition and, in his words, an elastic and critical space. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Being here with you makes me very happy. So thanks to ICOM UK. In 2015, while France and Tunisia were both facing terrorist attack, while people were killed for the name of religion, at the very same time, we opened one exhibition which was about religion and about yet an invisible fact, how people shared common places, shared pilgrimage within the Mediterranean. The exhibition was not designed as a diplomatic tool, but it became one, as we had to answer to a context which we did not expect. So let me just give you a few words about the museum I work in. It's a beautiful museum, national museum, which is not in Paris. Usually we are still very centralized in France. Museums are in Paris when they are national meaning that we are sponsored by Ministry of Culture, 75%. We opened in 2013 when Marseille was European Capital of Culture, beautiful museum, 200 permanent staff, 3 buildings, 1.6 million visitors per year. That's for the wow part. Nevertheless, what do we stand? And I would share with you what our weakness and the way we work internationally, thanks to the weakness and the weaknesses of the museum. First, we are a national museum, a French one, and working and questioning European and Mediterranean civilization. When you are French, you got how tricky it can be. 2, what is Europe? What is the limit of Europe? Would that include Russia or not? Sometime it did, sometime it didn't. Lately, not so much. Would we include Caucasia within Europe or not? With it, is it the European Union or not? You know all the questions that we can get. 2. What is the Mediterranean, if not a very 19th century colonial concept and a projection of on the from the northern shore on the southern shore of the Mediterranean? And when we opened the museum, we were in this very weak position of we're not sure of what is Europe, we're not sure of the Mediterranean. We're pretty convinced that we don't have any answer, but the only thing and the only mission, the only mission and what we stand for is just not to give answers, but I would say to share narrative, to share point of view. And for a French National Museum, this is something, trust me, because we are used to, truth and universal approach. So I'm sharing that with you also because the fact that we have shaped the museum as a critical space, as a working space, very horizontal, and trying to work with artists, with curators, not from a country and another one, because countries and borders are very colonial, especially when it's about the Mediterranean. So what we have tried to do, this is again to display point of view, narratives, and I'm going to say narrative pretty much in this presentation. And how do we work internationally? So as I said, we don't work with countries, never. We try not to, even if Ministry of Culture asks us to. We always going to pick theme or exhibition project that's going to reach a large audiences. One word before I start about the exhibition: community. Being a French museum and nationally sponsored, France is secular, as you might know, and there are certain topics that we're not allowed to reach, to treat, or to raise. I give you one example. If I tell you how many Jewish people, how many Muslim people we have in our team, or how many Muslim programs we have in our museum, I would get fired. It doesn't mean that we don't reach the topic. It just means that we need to have another approach, right? In 2015, sorry, you have a night vision of the museum if you are night people. Uh, sorry about that. I already mentioned that. A space for dialogue. In 2015, we shared an exhibition which was called Shared Sacred Sites. Very easy topic, very simple, but yet powerful, as I said. How Muslim, Christian, Jews share the same sacred place within, Palestine, Balkans, within the Mediterranean. Very easy exhibition through object, field of research, testimony. But the exhibition was very about the story of coexistence and how religion was very coexisting for several centuries, challenging the dominant idea of, a clash of religion. The exhibition had been decided, of course, a few years before, but the context matters. And the exhibition opened when France had to face a series of terrorist attacks. So basically, in January 2015, France and Paris was hit by several terrorist attacks. We opened the exhibition in April. It lasted till September. And we had another series of terrorist attacks in November. So the way the exhibition was thought and was designed was very different from the context, obviously. So, and the question of religion became even more and more sensitive, and it was not anymore a cultural project, but a political statement. And we had a massive pressure on this exhibition from our first sponsor, Ministry of Culture, for example. As a matter of fact, the exhibition was a success, at least in terms of visitors, because it was one of the most visited exhibitions of MUSEM, with 150,000 visitors within 4 months, which for us is a lot. And spontaneously, we had lots of visitors popping in and coming in saying that this is what we need now because we're a bit lost in all this religion mess, end of quote. Yeah. So the exhibition could have finished this way, but I got a message from one of my colleagues who is the chief curator of the Bardo Museum, which is the national Tunisian museum, Fatma Zora. And she just sent me a text in April, 2 weeks after the terrorist attack that happened in the National Museum of Tunis, where 22 people died and 43 were injured, including staff. She sent me a text saying that I've heard about this exhibition. This is what we need. Call me back. End of quote. And you get that. I'm a bit emotional. Sorry about that. You get that when you receive this kind of message. The question is not about a cultural project. It's not about an exhibition. It's about a shared responsibility, right? And you have to answer to that. So basically, then the reality popped in, and we realized how the project was impossible, absolutely impossible. Why? Because we had no transport company that would allow to do the transport, no insurance company, no financial mechanism that would support the project. And we had massive political pressure as well coming from France and from Tunis. How are we going to do this project and etc. So we changed our shift. And I guess what we have done, it was not anymore to bring a French exhibition made internationally to Tunis, but just to create a new content and a new exhibition because we shared the same, so to say, the same drama and the same history. So basically, we started to work on a common project and to reinvent it. No collection, that's fine. We're going to pick in the Tunisian collection. No professional for layout communication, that's fine. The staff is volunteering for free during its vacation to apply to the exhibition. Great. No financial support, that's fine. We're going to look for money together and etc. And what I want to share with you, this is that in this exhibition, we didn't share expertise, we shared weakness and uncertainty. And this is one of the best things that have happened these last 15 years working on an exhibition. I loved it, and everybody did. And everybody did also because what we share, despite this uncertainty, some of us, Tunisian and French, had to face and had experienced violence through, the terrorist attack, the colleagues that we have worked with. So it was kind of a space of resilience, but really. And I couldn't tell you who was Tunisian, who was French, and etc. I can tell you that what we have done together is such a common project, and I guess it was not anymore about expertise or these kind of things, which is great and that we do every day, but it was rather about trust and sharing what we are, which is already the only thing that we have. And to make a long story fast, so the exhibition opened at the end. We had massive political support from Tunisian president, French president, government, full of money. Everybody was very happy about it, and etc. Once it's done and you're held by civil society, every say, yeah, I was in, and etc. And yeah. The story, that's one of the pigs that represent the three religion in Tunis. The exhibition kept going, and I'll conclude in 2 sentences. The project kept going, and we displayed it in Marrakesh in 2018, French and Tunisian team with Moroccan partners. We sent this version to Paris 2019, and 2025 we sent it to Rome. And every chapter of the exhibition have been a different one, a different exhibition. And I guess it's one of the things for international relation. It's not about circulation, but transformation and how you adapt it to your context. But already that by heart. So last sentence. The most important thing is to share uncertainty, to share weakness, and that brings trust and confidence together. And of course, museum will not change the world, but sometime we can create condition to change a few things, and this is what we have to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Thank you, ICOM UK, for having me here. And I would also like to thank British Museum ITP program for bringing me here in Oxford to do this presentation. So thank you so much. I'll be talking about three main activities that I do in Nepal. One is at Nepal Architecture Archive. The other one is Tarago Next, where I'm full-time employed, and the repatriation campaign that we do in Nepal, and that's a separate campaign which I work with. So this is Nepal Architecture Archive. It is a dedicated architectural repository of Nepal to study preservation and interpretation of Nepali modern architecture. And this holds got Nepal's heritage. So the archive holds drawings, maps, photographs, and oral history, which talks about Nepal's modern documentation, but it's very much to do with mainly with the Kathmandu Valley's heritage and culture. This particular one is an image of Nepal Architecture Archive. Recently, we had the protest in Kathmandu, which is known as Zenzi protest. And when this protest happened, luckily the archive didn't catch fire, but the archive was very much damaged with the smoke and soot. So it was a very difficult situation for us how to kind of manage this archive and how we can still continue to engage with heritage and culture related people who regularly visited the archive for different reasons. So most of the time we were engaged with heritage-based projects. So I have got heritage-related project with Heidelberg University, where we document Nepali heritage from the Kathmandu Valley. This is like 6 years project, and we extended for another 2 years. So it's an 8-year long project, and which is a very first documentation of Kathmandu's heritage and culture. And similarly, we have started working with European Union, where we work with mainly with youths from outside Kathmandu Valley, where we engage with them and then make them aware about the heritage, culture, tradition, and the importance of their community and the indigenous knowledge. So the archive plays a crucial role in documenting Nepal's built heritage, especially in Kathmandu Valley. It has, after the second half of the last century, and the aftermaths of 2015's earthquake and rapid urbanization, things has so much changed, and we mainly talk about what we lost and what we need to remember. So archive has been a very instrumental collection for us to talk about not only in the Nepal Architecture Archive, but also at the Taragaon Next, which I'm showing in the image. And Taragaon Next was also vandalized during this protest. And it was mobbed and it was looted, buildings were damaged, and we were shut for 3 months. So basically, at Taragaon, we mainly engage with youths and cultural professionals, but we only don't, kind of get involved with architectural documentation. We go beyond. And that's one of the main reasons that the Taragaon Museum was converted into Taragaon Next. What is next for art, architecture, sustainability, environment, and so on. So 50% of our, effort will go in curatorial work and creative learning. So we engage with youths, adults through creative learning, workshops, and contemporary art. So every program that we create or we display in the museum will have a creative learning component attached to it. So during the protest, last protest in September, it was not only the Taragaon Museum and the Nepal Architecture Archive was vandalized, but there were lots of other built heritage that was vandalized within that time. And when you look at these images, these are important buildings. The one on that side, it's basically the president's residency. The middle one is a very important building, which is designed by Louis Khan. Then you got the Supreme Court as well. So all of these buildings were destroyed and vandalized at that time. And we lost lots of intangible heritage and tangible heritage during that protest. But during this protest, some buildings survived. Some of the activists who were working in the heritage and culture sector, they were able to protect the Department of Archaeology and also the manuscript department within that periphery. So in the last 75 years, basically Nepal has gone through several protests and conflicts, and which is very difficult for us to kind of rebuild the heritage and also kind of reinterpret what was happening in the past. So if you look at all these events that has happened in the past, the Genji protests I talked about, earthquake has destroyed many important sites in Kathmandu Valley, and during that time, lots of heritage fragments were stolen and lost and destroyed. And the conflict happened between 1996 and 2000, and that also kind of, that time everything was neglected because country was going through a, political crisis. So heritage was obviously neglected. And around that time, when we talk about that particular time frame, and especially between 1950s and 90s, there was a systematic removal of sculptures and pawas from Nepal. And this particular one, I want to talk about as an example. This is a monastery which is not far away from Kathmandu, and this is 5 objects which is actually was a part of the community, and these were stolen in 1970s, and all 5 of these objects were lost from the monastery, and later on what we identified was they were actually in different museums around the world. And all of these are now identified. We are still having different conversation with institutions, and we are looking to retrieve this back to Nepal. The number 3 image that has been actually identified, and the private collector has kindly returned this object back to Nepal. So the number 3 object is actually back in Nepal. And when we talk about other heritage, like this is basically the monument in Kathmandu Valley, and this particular necklace is from this particular monument. And I'm actually comparing this with the necklace that was lost from Louvre Museum. And when you talk about when something is lost from the museums, especially when you talk about Louvre, it made a headline. But when we lost the heritage from the temple that belonged to our God, it was not able to do so. And these sort of issues, I think we're trying to deal with it at the same time. And these are 2 of the objects which is still in the Louvre. This is actually in the Guimet Museum, and which we have claimed, and we are looking to get this back as well. So this particular one, I thought I would include this in my presentation. As I stand today here in this historic city of Oxford, my heart lingers on this particular Nepali deity from the 7th century. It's a Padmapani, which is actually located at the Ashmolean Museum. And this particular one is patiently waiting to return home, since it was claimed in 2021. I cannot help but feel the weight of this absence, the stories, the devotion, and the sacred presence that belong to Nepal. So this is another object that I think it's very relevant to kind of talk about while I'm in Oxford. And we are not claiming our deities only from the museums around the world, but this particular one is actually claimed from the Nepali Museum, from the National Museum, and which is the same image of Padmapani, which is actually claimed from the museum in Nepal and was handed back to the community. And I think this particular one is, this is the last slide, and I think it's very relevant to kind of talk about, how we want to kind of let our gods and goddesses live and die with dignity. The first image refers to, an image that is actually kept in the museum, which is very clean. It's a very clean contour. The second one is actually a part of the community where you actually, worship it on a daily basis. But the third one is even more important. It has survived for centuries, and it has lost its contour, and it is about to convert back into stone, right? So what we want to do is, like, even though, the gods and goddesses, they deteriorate over the time, we feel that it's okay, because we have to let our gods and goddesses live and die with dignity. Thank you so much.
I will try to tell you my story, but actually our story. It will be a collaboration of my words and your imagination. But I want to begin with something we now begin and end our talks with in Ukraine. I thank the Defense Forces of Ukraine for the possibility of having free voice, without fear, without suppression, without simplification, without imitation. And I'm thankful for the possibility to dare. Imagine you are a risk manager, professional, with economics background. You spent 14 years in banking, working with human behavior systems, organizational processes, business continuity in crisis and disaster situation, in uncertainty, with human errors and mistakes. And then after 2014, when Russia's war against Ukraine started, you move into the art field, searching for visible values and true stories. You spent over 10 years working with contemporary art, institutional development, and international relations. You are surrounded by curators, art historians, researchers, and your experience expands cognitively, emotionally, physically. But the most important thing, you found your people who can engage with complexity, who can hold multiple layers of reality at once. The system you enter is still shaped by Soviet legacy. So, society is working through post-totalitarian and post-colonial trauma. Institutions are fragile, trust is limited, people want new institutions, but what type? One more aspect of that legacy in economics frameworks, for example, artists cannot legally sell their own work as their own free expression. They can only execute somebody's commission. Museums lack autonomy and sustainable funding. Museum workers perceive museums more as cathedrals than forums. Many professionals survive on minimal salaries, fragmented contracts, multiple side projects. There is a sense of glass ceiling, professionally, economically, personally. So together with colleagues, you create an NGO. You begin to think through system thinking approaches. By 2021, you develop a 30 years strategy with project lists on 45 PowerPoint slides. And you identify a set of interconnected challenges. At the national level, a strong demand to rethink identity, but insufficient cultural tools to do so. At the professional level, no systematic collection of contemporary art for over 30 years, no written history, no infrastructure for research or interpretation, no international entry point. At the regional and city levels, a demand for meaning, for spaces, for cultural agency, for moving beyond provinciality, for innovations. And you realize this is not about building one institution, it's about rethinking the system. A key moment comes with a conflict around the legacy of an artist from Kherson, a southern regional city in Ukraine, which was occupied and deliberated partially. It makes something very clear. Ukraine doesn't need one centralized museum of contemporary art. It needs local agency connected nationally and internationally. So together with colleagues, you begin to develop the idea of network museum to be established in the 21st century, not in 20th. A museum not as a building, but as an ecosystem, keeping its museum heart, but open to different players from different contexts and fields. An ecosystem in institutional development follows the logic of open systems, emerging organically or by design, but always forming around an idea ambitious enough to connect and mobilize independent actors towards shared goals. Then, 24th February 2022, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine begins. One of your colleagues, in shock, writes to an artist asking to preserve a work for the future museum. Very important work from that time, because it shown that all, even mothers and child, will resist. Your team stays in Ukraine. You begin curatorial observation of artistic responses online. This becomes what is now the wartime art archive, over 20,000 of works. Together with partners, you launch the Ukrainian Emergency Art Fund. This is what we might call a weak signal, soft but influential. It tells artists your voice matters. Not only your activism or survival, but your artistic practice itself. After 3 months, you realize if you only react, you will not survive. You must continue thinking long term. In 2023, you create a large exhibition in Kyiv. How are you? 500 works, around 100 artists. It becomes a space to reconnect with society, to allow reflection, to normalize emotions, including anger. You are afraid that it could re-traumatize people, but you dare to do this. And neurophysiologists studying this exhibition find that it stabilizes emotional states. At the same time, international researchers begin reaching out from art and conflict, war studies, memory studies, archiving, anthropology, cultural studies, and other fields. You begin to see a larger picture. Your work expands into international collaboration. You engage with the role of art in national security and diplomacy. You develop tools to track looted heritage. You contribute to ethical standards in the art market. You also rethink what safety means for artists, including physical, psychological, professional, and civic dimensions, both inside and outside the country. It means whitewashing, both-siding, identitarian ghettos, and other challenges. And today, you have launched a national architectural competition in Vinnytsia, another regional city in Ukraine, in the center of Ukraine, for a pilot site of Ukrainian Museum of Contemporary Art as a network institution with international jury and UNESCO partnership. This is not just a building. This is first physical node of a network museum, local institutions which work locally and globally and connecting local scenes with international processes. A museum as an ecosystem actor, working with complexity in conditions of war. This is what we mean ecosystem museum diplomacy from civil society. Thank you.
So we'll move into the discussion part of this session, and I'm sure you all have plenty of questions. Just before we open it to the floor, given that we're in Oxford and a point that Roshan raised in his session, I'd just like to ask about the deity that he mentioned that is in the Ashmolean, and they've put in a claim, and just if he could maybe give us an update on where discussions are with that at the moment.
So yeah, thank you. This was claimed in 2021. So usually what happens is at that time, everything that was identified by the Nepal Heritage Recovery Campaign, it was being posted on social medias through Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And that is how it was exposed at that time. But usually the process is like when we do expose any of the, or we make any claims, we send our request to Department of Archaeology as well. So we basically create a paperwork for them and send them all the in-situ pictures, all the related materials and everything to them. And usually what happens is through Department of Archaeology, it goes to Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs will contact the local embassy in that particular respective country, and the embassy should be connecting it. So I believe that it has gone through that process.
Thank you. That's really interesting to hear. So we'll open it up to the floor now. If you've got a question, please could you put up your hand and then just wait for a mic to reach you. And when asking a question, we'd be really grateful if you could just say your name and the organization that you work for. So any questions? Yep, there's one here.
Yes, thank you. I'm Gabriel from Ibadan. I'm asking a question to the speaker from Nepal. You're requesting for repatriation of the materials outside your country, and we have seen persistence of conflicts. And what post-colonial plan do you have to secure all this material? Even the one right with you is often being attacked by its own people. It's happened everywhere. I've cited a case in my country too. So I think we as curators, where there are conflicts, I'm not answering the question anyway. So, but I'm just saying that what plan, model do you intend to have to secure, if even the one here is given back to you, to secure them from further destruction or conflicts? Thank you.
I think the conflicts it's something it's never be planned, right? It will happen, and then we have to go through that, and we have to figure out how we salvage and protect our heritage. So that's one aspect. But the other thing is, like, especially, when it comes to the heritage and ritual objects, what we normally do is like the Department of Archaeology is actually creating an inventory to record all these objects. And till now, what was happening is like we have been relying on archives from personal collection and different other institutions to claim it. So I think it's more about the process. I don't think there is an exact answer to that, but every case is a different case. Sometimes when we claim heritage objects, like it doesn't need to even go through the Department of Archaeology. The process completely works in a reverse mechanism. So what I meant by that is, like, once it's out in the social media, the museum will voluntarily contact the Nepali embassy and they send it back. And we have got many cases like that. So it's really, depends on case to case.
I would like to thank everybody who spoke today, but of course, particularly to the people in the last session. My name is Denise Mayo-Baron. I'm representing Claremont Graduate University, and we write on difficult heritage and reconciliation. And this is exactly what you talked about. I have a question for Michael. Given that France is a secularized state, however, that you have such a success with exhibitions that look at spirituality. Are you thinking to integrate spirituality in other exhibitions? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. We do, but it's not because I just mentioned that because usually with the UK, with UK partners, museums, and that's true for some countries worldwide, we have a different definition of communities. And the fact that France and the museum I work for is nationally funded and sponsored, and the fact that France is secular changed, the way we program exhibition. It doesn't mean that we don't talk about religion, we don't talk about question that we should not in a secular state. It's just the way we question it. So basically, in the example that I gave and that I shared with you, it's rather about how religion works on an anthropological point of view, rather than doing a Jewish program by Jewish for Jewish. And this is one of the issues that we have when we have programs sponsored by the European Commission, when we've been asked, how many, religion do you have in your staff? How many religion you have in your visitors? We can't answer this question. But when we have an exhibition that is about how everybody have a shared pilgrimage places, how Jewish and Muslim go to the same pilgrimage together or not, or side by side, it's just another point of view. So we do have religion in mostly all our exhibition. It's just the way that we do it is not community based because we're secular. It's rather broader. And I think, I'm not saying that we're doing good, but I think that sometimes not having a program that is made by and for give you a broader approach. And I think it's sometimes more accurate.
Thank you. I'm Karina Mintahir. I'm from ICOM Indonesia. I want to ask, what does resilience looks like in a museum and for its teams, given that conflict happen all the time? Thank you.
So in Nepal's case, I think these what's happening in Ukraine, for example, it's not the similar kind of case that we have in Nepal. So these conflicts are slightly different than in its behavior and actions. But what we realize as institutions and museums and as a museum professional is, I think we need to figure out a way how we preserve our past. And the only way to do that is not to stop documenting. And I think if we start documenting whatever is around and whatever has happened, and that brings a completely different story, whether we talk about a past or whether we talk about a conflict or whether we talk about a loss or whether we talk about anything else. I think documentation along the line is very important. So whether it's a photographic documentation or a 3D scan or it's a film, I think that is the only way for the museums to kind of address what is happening in the country and also make that material available to that generation and also for the future generation.
Okay. Just two things to share with you. For the exhibition that I presented, the staff was resilient because half of them, the French and the Tunisian one, have been concerned directly, friends or relative have been killed or injured in terrorist attack. So you got it, right? What surprises me, this is rather how come that museums can be placed for resilience. And this is what surprises me most. How come that a museum that was, which is very vertical, very colonial, and, lots of criticisms that we can do about museums, how come that these places that was not made for that is a place of resilience? And for this exhibition, which was about holy shared places, what really struck me, this is that people would spontaneously, as I said, went into the exhibition just trying to find a place to be and to be with other people. And that, I guess, this is the first step of resilience. Be with.
In our situation, I have a few thoughts regarding this question. First of all, I should support this idea about documentation because we observing so-called archival impulse around all institutions, initiatives, and this is at this moment we have this setting that we should archive, we should document because we don't know if we will be occupied, then it will be demolished. So this is logic is very common in our landscape, I would say. And the second thought is about I didn't put it in my speech about our work in the memory culture field, because it's a huge topic, and we have a lot of initiatives in Ukraine now dedicated to memorialization, and a huge demand from different so-called homadas or communities from different groups and people to memorialize their beloved ones. And in this context, we are talking about the rehabilitation of process. So, because under the pressure and under lack of resources, we should be result-oriented. It looks like to be effective, to use resources very effectively, but this result orientation doesn't help to build proper process in memory culture. And now in different layers with different policymakers and institutions and people who want to create memorials, we are talking about this rehabilitation of process, that process matters, and we should develop our skills to have this dialogue with very different groups, not only affected people, but also to keep space for professionals, for memory studies professionals, museum workers, artistic practices in this field of memorialization, because this moment is very stressful, and keeping space, this is the key.
Thank you so much. And I think that brings us perfectly to the end of the session. I'm sorry, I know there are more questions, but hopefully you'll get a chance to chat to Yulia and Roshan and Michael throughout the rest of the conference. So could we just give our excellent speakers a round of applause? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hannah and Michael, Roshan and Yulia. You shared some really emotional and important stories there. So thank you very much for sharing these with us, and also a lot of solutions. We are now coming to the final keynote of the day, and I'm particularly delighted to introduce our final keynote speaker, Sir Tristram Hunt. Sir Tristram is director of the V&A, a family of museums dedicated to the power of creativity. And since taking up the post in 2017, Sir Tristram has championed design education in UK schools, encouraged debate around the history of global and colonial collections, and overseen the transition to a multi-site museum covering 6 sites across the UK, one of which I believe was open today. Is that correct? Yes, there we are. Formerly a member of Parliament for Stoke-on-Trent Central, he has a doctorate in Victorian history from Cambridge University and is the author of several books, including The Radical Potter, Josiah Wedgwood, and The Transformation of Britain. So Tristram, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very, very much for inviting me to speak today. I'd like to thank Mikhail, Roshan, and Yulia for their incredible presentations. I'd like to thank ICOM and the Art Fund for funding today. I appreciate you have been in a windowless room on a beautiful April day when Oxford comes alive. And so I will keep this focused in the last session of the day. In December 2025, Alexander Butchagin, the head of the sector of ancient archaeology of the Northern Black Sea region of the State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, was arrested in Poland at the request of Ukraine. Butchagin was charged with conducting illegal excavations in the disputed Crimea territory and seizing material, quotes, in favor of the Russian Federation. As the Art newspaper reported, antiquities and archaeological heritage are central to Russia's campaign to claim Ukrainian territory and identity, not just in Crimea, but in other occupied Ukrainian territories. The incident illustrates the theme of my talk this afternoon, whether soft power, in this instance ancient archaeology, has a role in our new Hobbesian era of realpolitik, where shared institutions, common rules, and broadly convergent expectations about legitimate behavior are being systematically smashed. In the ugly words of the Donald Trump White House official Stephen Miller, you can talk all you want about international niceties and everything else, but we live in a world, the real world, that is governed by power. These are the iron laws of the world. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has called it a rupture in the world order, a harsher landscape of strategic rivalry, economic coercion, resurgent nationalism, and deepening pressure on the institutions that mediate between nations and publics. This landscape of strategic competition extends beyond forces of arms through to information, infrastructure, finance, technology, migration, culture, and as we see in occupied Crimea, and we heard from Yulia, questions of memory. The language of recent defence thinking is instructive here. The UK Ministry of Defence's 2025 Integrated Operating Concept argues that old distinctions between peace and war, public and private, foreign and domestic, and state and non-state are increasingly out of date. That authoritarian states pursue a continuous struggle designed to undermine cohesion, erode resilience, and secure strategic advantage below the threshold of open warfare. That diagnosis has profound implications not only for defence policy, but for the civic and cultural institutions on which democratic resilience depends. Because in such a moment as this, museums matter, not in spite of geopolitics, but because of it. As James Cuno argues and still argues, they stand as a rebuke to the fantasy of pure, sealed, self-contained national cultures. They show us, through the material record, that civilization has always been shaped by movement, encounter, exchange, imitation, borrowing, conflict, and translation. And here is just a picture of the V&A. Objects cross borders before diplomats do. A museum collection, properly understood, is a testament against chauvinism. At a time when authoritarian politics seek to weaponize history, collapse nuance into propaganda, and turn identity into grievance, museums are not peripheral institutions. They are part of the operating environment. They are among the places where societies explain themselves to themselves, where evidence is publicly tested, where difficult paths can be held up to scrutiny, and where internationalism can be made visible, tangible, and credible. In short, soft power remains absolutely critical to the maintenance of the kind of liberal democracies which allows us to gather here in freedom and safety to discuss ideas, disagree, and return happily to our families. And Yulia put it much better than that. If, as the integrated operating concept by the Ministry of Defence suggests, the contemporary contest is one for cohesion, resilience, and strategic advantage, then museums have a role to play in that contest, not as instruments of propaganda, but as institutions of democratic seriousness and rigorous scholarship. Combinations of both hard power and soft power are critical to improving domestic and international peace and security. The case for representative democracy, the rule of law, freedom of speech, a functioning media holding power to account, a flourishing civil society, the right to worship, cannot, as we are witnessing in real time in contemporary Iran, be nurtured through an aerial bombing campaign. These are all social goods, and museums have a soft power function, not only in promoting these values, but also in sustaining them. You will no doubt have heard the definition enough times today, but in Joseph Nye's classic formulation, soft power is the ability to affect others to obtain the outcome one wants through attraction rather than coercion or payments. As such, it encompasses a nation's culture, strengths, values, and foreign policies, and is critical to how a nation is perceived internationally and its influence, role, and opportunities in the global arena. The UK government frames soft power in terms of trust, attractiveness, admiration. A country that is trusted draws more inward investment and more trading partners. Countries perceived as attractive are better able to draw visitors and international students and top global talent. And countries that are more admired find it easier to forge the alliances needed to work together on solving global problems. And in the rather rosy analysis of the British Council, the UK has long benefited from a depth of soft power assets, which have helped shape and strengthen the UK's position on the world stage. These soft power assets have proved remarkably resilient in the face of significant domestic, political, economic, and social change. And I think that's a kind of polite reference to the political and economic carnage in this country of the last decade, or Brexit, as we sometimes call it. And to be fair, the international data backs it up. In 2025, the British Council found that the UK was the third most attractive G20 nation to young people across the group, behind Japan and Italy, perhaps understandable, but above Canada. And in 2025, Brand Finance's Soft Power Index ranked the UK as the third most attractive nation brand. The diversity of UK society and heritage, all celebrated and interrogated in our museums, is a crucial element of this cultural attractiveness. The UK's tapestry of cultural influences enhances the country's global image, making it a more attractive destination for tourism, education, and business, and fostering an environment of inclusivity and mutual understanding. As such, soft power is an increasingly important priority for the UK government. As Foreign Secretary, David Lammy created a soft power commission on which I sit and sought to develop a more strategic approach to the country's range of cultural, sporting, institutional, and regulatory assets, only some of which, you can see represented here. And part of this urgency is because of international competition. While France spends nearly £600 million every year on soft power and boasts 1,200 cultural and educational institutes around the world, the British Council budget is down to around £160 million and only 170 offices. The UK resource for cultural diplomacy is lower than Germany, Spain, Portugal, and South Korea. And South Korea, of course, whose £1.3 billion investment in 2025 alone in Hallyu has reaped such remarkable global rewards, especially amongst the young. To compound the crisis, both the British Council and the BBC World Service, one of the most trusted providers of independent news and a quiet servant of English culture, have endured years of underfunding. And this at a time when the likes of Russia, China, North Korea, and other authoritarian regimes are extending their reach in the digital and public realm, pushing disinformation and conspiracy theories. This is not a side effect of authoritarian foreign policy, notes a recent British Council report. It is a central objective, and it reflects a clear-eyed understanding that soft power depends upon trust in ways that hard power does not. And I think in this country we will look back in horror at some of our politicians and academics who thought it was a good idea to go on Russia Today and some of the Iranian news outlets over the last decade. And of course, tragically, the United States is now abandoning its role supporting democracy and liberalism. Yet here, of course, we come to the inherent contradiction of UK soft power. Its true strength lies in its absence of formal control by government authority. This is what distinguishes it from government-led cultural diplomacy, those dreaded years of friendship or bilateral opportunities around sporting and state events. Part of the power of the BBC, the Premier League, the royal family, our universities, our museums, our galleries, is that they are not direct agents of the state. A truly successful soft power strategy creates an environment that is conducive for such assets to flourish, and in turn, to have them harnessed for national objectives and international ambition. And the incredible heterogeneity of Hallyu, the South Korean wave of creativity in film, design, TV, music, fashion, and beauty, is a standout example of that. And for the V&A to do as we did, an incredibly successful exhibition on the notion of K-wave, which we then, in a kind of sort of meta soft power cultural model, toured to other countries as a British institution celebrating South Korean soft power, somehow took this to a different phrase. So when it comes to soft power in an age of hard realities, what role for museums and galleries in this new world disorder? First of all, to my mind, a positive commitment to our role supporting the functioning of liberal democracies. The recent decline in public support for democracy represents a significant shift in the global political landscape, a so-called democratic recession that has major societal implications. According to the VDEM 2026 Democracy Report, democracy is back to 1978 levels for the average global citizen. The gains of the third wave of democratization, beginning in 1974 in Portugal, are almost eradicated. As of 2025, the world has 92 autocracies and 87 democracies, with only 7% of the world's population living in true liberal democracies. Now, the vote on Sunday might have to readjust some of those figures in Budapest. The disillusionment with democracy is particularly acute among younger generations, notably Gen Z and younger millennials, who report historically low levels of faith in democratic governance. As of 2026, major surveys, such as the TU Youth Study, indicate that barely half of young people in France, Spain, and Poland believe democracy is inherently superior to other forms of government. A significant minority, roughly 20% across the European continent, suggests that, quotes, an effective authoritarian leader might be preferable if they could deliver on economic results. This is a major risk to the future of democracy that needs addressing. Many of the great museums of Europe and America came of age during the development of liberal democracy in the 19th century. As Professor Ben Ansell argued in his 2023 Reith Lectures, the institutions of our liberal democracy are like a spider's web. Each agreement, each institution, each norm of behavior, a single strand painstakingly formed over the centuries, binding our body politic. And these strands tie our democratic history to our democratic future. But there's nothing inevitable about liberal democracy's triumph. And I think we now have a responsibility to ensure its continuance. At the V&A, the inspiration for the museum, in its original manifestation as the South Kensington Museum, came partly from the philosopher Wilhelm von Humboldt and his ideals of enlightenment and universal education, which so influenced the young Prince Albert at the University of Bonn, but also the man at the bottom left, Gottfried Semper, the architect of the Dresden Opera House and the Vienna Ringstrasse and the great ally of Prince Albert, he fled to the UK after the 1848 Continental Revolutions and found refuge in Kensington Palace, of all places. And he described museums and public monuments as the true teachers of a free people. Semper thought that public museums had a crucial role to play in an age of growing democracy and citizenship in the 1800s. Part of the purpose of museums was that, in that mid-Victorian improving manner, to nurture the curious, educated, and polite habits of citizenship, essential for a functioning democracy which has to live beyond the simple norms of the ballot box. Museums were cast as consciously cosmopolitan civic spaces, the people's galleries, whose ethos and collections extended beyond class, race, politics, and gender. Even if that often entailed highly anachronistic understandings of hierarchy, race, and inequality, which no modern public institution would condone, the broader mission, I think, of sustaining and supporting civil society remains. Today, that also entails challenging tradition, entrenched identities, and myths of ethnic certainty. From New Delhi to Washington to Beijing, the vogue for populist nationalist governments makes the role of the museum, with its galleries born of exchange, adaptation, and migration, more important to civil discourse than ever. The role of museums in fostering the intangible habits of citizenship, social capital, and trust, those vital components of soft power, learning to disagree, moving beyond the certainties of the echo chamber, encountering difference, understanding the complexity of history, avoiding the reflex of cancellation and no platforming, is a soft power necessity if liberal democracy is going to renew itself. Which is why it's so especially critical that young people feel welcomed and confident in museums and galleries. If this is where support for representative democracy is at its weakest, then we will need to work harder to bring younger visitors into these social spaces with their associated civic meeting. And as you've heard, this week we opened a V&A East Museum on the Olympic Park in Stratford with exactly that ambition to bring 18 to 30-year-olds from traditionally non-museum going backgrounds and families in a highly diverse, young, fast-growing part of London, underserved by cultural institutions, and to bring them in to the museum-going habit of cultural practice. And that work needs to continue if we want to assure an educated, engaged citizenry as a social good and strategic asset. The second role I would highlight for museums as soft power actors is the creative use of collections to promote international understanding, most especially between the global north and south. I think many of us in Europe were shocked to see the level of sympathy which Russia's grotesque act of colonial aggression against Ukraine seemed to elicit in parts of Africa, South and Southeast Asia. Even as children's cancer hospitals were bombed, the almost sympathetic response in India, South Africa, and elsewhere clearly revealed how much work there is to be done across the full spectrum of soft power assets in Europe. And for British and European museums, addressing long-standing issues of restitution and repatriation has, as Roshan reminded us, to be absolutely essential to that conversation. Authentic reciprocity in international engagement, cultural relations programs that listen as well as broadcast is critical to soft power effectiveness. I think Laura spoke to some of these points this morning, but I would highlight the public disconnect and the PR disconnect between what UK museums are already actively doing in this field and the suggestion, sometimes proffered not a million miles from where I stand, that everything in our national museums is looted and needs to be returned and no one is doing anything. European governments have been, hold on, stay with that one for the moment. European governments have been much more engaged in addressing colonial legacies in museum collections than British ones. But there has in fact been a growing spate of returns in recent years, thanks to the hard work of so many colleagues. One could, for instance, highlight the successful 2022 transfer of ownership of 72 Benin bronzes from the Horniman Museum and Garden in London to Nigeria's National Commission for Museums and Monuments, and then with extraordinary generosity and farsight, Nigeria's decision to lend some of those objects back, so they remained in the cases in the Horniman Museum, but under the ownership of the Nigerian government. In Edinburgh, as you see, the National Museum of Scotland rematriating a memorial pole to the Nisaga Nation of Canada, the work of the Manchester Museum, the Royal Albert Memorial Museum, and the Arts Council England guidance on restitution and repatriation, providing best practice principles around provenance research and claims to contested heritage. So this is ethical leadership in and of itself. But for my theme, in terms of soft power, it is critical, as we know that the values and behaviors of cultural assets profoundly shape perceptions. Engagement in open and collaborative ways, even if it falls short of deaccession and restitution, which UK law prevents the British Museum, the Victoria and Albert Museum, and 7 other national collections from enacting, is vital for the UK's reputation. At the V&A, where we are essentially governed by the same legislative strictures as the British Museum, the absence of formal restitution powers does not preclude us from thinking creatively around the display, sharing, and interpretation of colonial era collections. And we do so based on 4 principles of practice: provenance research, collections transparency, institutional accountability, and partnership working. And this has resulted in a series of renewable cultural partnerships in Ghana, in Turkey, and in India, sharing the collections, we hope, in a more equitable and collaborative manner. The great director of the CSMVS Museum in Mumbai, Mr. Mukherjee, he frames it best when he writes that, quotes, "Museums must recognize that the unresolved repatriation and restitution disputes can, in the absence of serious efforts at conciliation, paralyze the sharing of significant cultural objects. All initiatives should be taken to evolve a universal and acceptable system that enables sharing of objects and knowledge so that institutional narratives or legal doctrines do not come in the way of celebrating a world culture." And in this particular context, I would also argue that one of Great Britain's great soft power advantages is a policy of free entry to our national museums, not least those that own imperial and colonial collections. At the moment, the government is consulting on reforming this to allow for the charging of non-UK visitors, like pretty much every other European country. At the V&A, we have particular reservations about such a shift, but I also do think that charging foreign visitors to see collections with those kind of colonial and imperial histories could prove self-defeating when it comes to long-term cultural diplomacy. So my final soft power suggestion for an era of hard realities is the necessity of maintaining research and scholarship at the very heart of our institutions. And this is a space we opened last year, the Collections and Research Centre, the V&A East Storehouse, which on the one hand is a sort of sublime celebration of our reserve collections, but on the other hand is a conservation space, an archive, a research space, having that investigation into the collections at its heart. As you know, we live in a dizzying age of disinformation and AI hallucination. A combination of political autocrats labeling the mainstream media as fake news and clickbait digital-first profit models are undermining the function of news media in civil society. The gatekeeper is derided, all truths are equal, opinion trumps fact, and AI-generated deepfakes combine with social media algorithms to undermine the public sphere. In this landscape of like-minded communities and consciously sown confusion, trusted news institutions are essential components of soft power. But so too are museums and galleries. According to the 2025 Veracity Index, some 80% of the public think museum curators can be trusted to tell the truth, pretty much alongside scientists, teachers, and professors, and interestingly, above historians and artists, and judges, and politicians. Now, I know we've all convinced ourselves that museums are not neutral. I know we've all convinced ourselves that we're lost in a kind of Foucauldian funk of bias and structural self-deception. But I'm here at the end of this day to tell you that museums are seen by the public as trusted sites of understanding and interpretation. The public value us and you as non-partisan places of inquiry and debate, learning and scholarship. And this reputation for institutional integrity is enormously important, if only for our soft power function. We need to remain open to scholarly critique and peer review and institutional accountability, and at Storehouse, we interrogate very actively the colonial and imperial past within our collections. But we also retain our confidence about our civic mission, and just as importantly, do not become vehicles for political activism, even for seemingly attractive sounding projects like social justice. Because when we place ideological goals above our scholarly public mission, then I can promise you those enviable levels of trust will soon free fall to the same position as social media influencers at the bottom. Our ability to counter disinformation and trusted narratives will be shot. Credibility, autonomy, scholarship, transparency, these are not only important values to promote across our museums, but they are a critical part of the ecology of verified information and agreed historical understanding crucial for the functioning of liberal democracies. Let me finish with an object and return to where I began, with Ukraine and Russia and the interplay of hard and soft power. In the very center of the V&A's recently reopened Gilbert Galleries are two pairs of parcel-gilt holy gates from the Church of the Nativity of the Virgin Mary in Kiev-Pechersk Lavra, or the Monastery of Caves in Kiev, a preeminent center of Orthodox Christianity in Eastern Europe since the 11th century. The inscription on the gates, referring to the reign of Tsarina Catherine II of Russia, created confusion, as it was assumed that those gates had been commissioned by the Tsarina herself. This commission would have coincided with her stay at the monastery in 1784, before traveling to Crimea, which had just been annexed to her Russian Empire. However, we now know this to be not true, after museum professionals at the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra National Preserve reached out and revealed details of the gate's commission by the monastery's authorities. From this, a collaborative partnership was born, and more provenance history of the gates has been uncovered and understood than ever before, even confirming the identity of the makers. This collaboration has also triggered wider research at the V&A into Ukrainian heritage and is the focus of a symposium planned for this September. Institutions across the UK are making a concerted effort to decolonize Ukrainian heritage, best exemplified by the ICOM UK guide, which equips museums and heritage professionals with reliable information to, quote, challenge harmful colonial narratives, negative stereotyping, misrepresenting and mislabeling of Ukraine and its cultural heritage. Here, a museum's soft power of scholarship, collaboration, and integrity can, in the long run, by assisting civil society and democratic citizenship, support the hard power of the brave Ukrainian people fighting against the imperial aggression of the Putin government. We've chosen to do so not because of a government edict, but because our culture and values knows it to be right. That is soft power in our disordered, dangerous age of hard realities. Thank you.
Thank you, Tristram. That was a flourishing finish, and really inspiring as well at the end of the day. Very, very grateful for you to be able to make it today, actually, because I know your time is very precious, and we're very privileged to have had you here in Oxford today. Now, we have almost made it now, almost the end of the day. There's just a few closing remarks from my co-chair Maria and I. Maria, would you mind joining me on stage? Some observations from both of us about the day, and Maria's going to sum up the morning sessions.
Thanks, Christian, for being such a skillful guide during ICOM UK's whistle-stop tour of the museum world. I think you said, I think you counted 20 countries and 5 continents that we embrace today, all from the comfort of our conference chairs. And thank you also to Tristram for mentioning Joseph Nye. For those who are unaware, Nye was the person who coined the term soft power, and he died last year. Before I start my reflections on this morning's presentations, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the emotional labour that's required to undertake much of the work we've heard about today, especially in contexts shaped by inequality, conflict, colonial histories, or trauma. This work is often invisible, but it's a necessity in our increasingly fractured world, and it should be recognised. So thank you. And then regarding my reflections on this morning's sessions, I'd like to return to a question that's quietly underpinned all of today's discussions. What does museum diplomacy actually look like in practice, especially in a world marked by political uncertainty, limited institutional resources, and shifting global relationships? In his opening speech, Gavin Svensson, director of the Museum of Natural History and our wonderful host venue, pointed out that cultural diplomacy is not limited to the work of governments. It's happening here today in our museums, our galleries, our historic houses, our archives, our libraries, and other cultural organisations. We're all cultural diplomats. We're all active participants, repairing trust that may have been damaged, maintaining respectful relationships where more formal channels of communication may prove challenging. Our first keynote speaker, Sasha Priva, spoke about a liberation day for museums, in which he made a powerful argument for museums to develop deliberate collaborations to meet emerging global challenges, especially in the face of some of the largest changes to world order since the Cold War. We need to think of museum diplomacy not as a fixed, unchanging concept, but something that purposefully and necessarily evolves to embrace the uncertainty and the volatility. During our first panel, Advancing Global Partnerships Through Museum Diplomacy, we heard about practical examples for making museum diplomacy work. The first speaker told us how the Science Museum Group is championing cultural diplomacy and science diplomacy. The exhibition Becoming America, How Science Shaped a Nation has been over 10 years in development in partnership with the Library of Congress with both UK and UK objects and scholarship. It shows the importance of weathering storms together, including a pandemic, changes in administration, and the unexpected sacking overnight of a high-profile director. Our second speaker confronted us with a structural absence. What happens when there's no specific ministry or state organisation to coordinate international cultural engagement, such as we've got the British Council, there's also the Ukrainian Institute, the Institute Français that we have in Europe. Museums and other cultural organisations often step in as informal diplomatic actors. In the USA, a new cross-sector group aims to present cultural engagement not as a political optional extra, but as an essential national infrastructure tied to economic development, public health, employment, and soft power. A key message there is to actively identify your weakest link, your loudest critics, and to find ways to engage with and strengthen them, to find commonalities and build allies in unexpected places using innovative approaches. The third speaker on Korea's National Asian Cultural Centre demonstrated how international exchange programs should be planned to grow in a sustainable way, focused on the question of what can we learn from each other. The program shows how trust can be nurtured even when official diplomatic channels become strained. And then for our second panel, Museums Connecting Communities Internationally Through Equitable Cross-Cultural Exchange, my panel. Our first speaker showed how diaspora collaborations within a British context enables the museum to function as a site of diplomacy, fostering trust, belonging and dialogue across cultural boundaries, shifting the museum from a site of showing culture to a site for hosting culture. Our second speaker transported us to West Africa, where digital tools which focus on indigenous knowledge, ethical data collection, and authentic community voices allow museums to reposition themselves as equal and active agents in a post-colonial global cultural exchange, where technology is used to create a new model of museum diplomacy for the global south, shifting the dial on global heritage discourse. And our third and final speaker of the morning positioned an Indigenous artist exchange as a form of international museum diplomacy, in this case between the USA and Australia, based on commonality, but also why the basics, a welcoming environment, food, safety, comfort, should be among those priority techniques and tools that we have when developing those diplomatic strategies. Across all the talks we heard this morning, one theme emerged for me with particular clarity. Museum diplomacy is rarely about grand gestures or formal declarations. More often, it's about trust built through patience, determination, and open-mindedness. It can also be found in unexpected places, delivered with quiet determination by those who truly believe in the power of museums to uphold human dignity and cultural exchange. The future of museum diplomacy will continue to be built in rooms like this, through shared conversation and the steady, often invisible work that will happen long after this conference ends. Now over to Christian for reflections on this afternoon's inspiring talks.
Thank you, Maria. The afternoon started with Laura from Broekhoven explaining the increasingly important role of museum diplomacy, but going further and beyond two partners coming together for a shared exhibition, Laura suggested that we should be looking at forming long-term regenerative relationships, going from the sustainability equivalent of doing no harm to being transformative and regenerative. This was a very nice nod to our, and I can see Elise smiling at the back there, nod to our 2025 conference on regenerative development in museums. And interesting that this concept is applicable not only to the environment, but also to community partnerships. In session 3, Jamie talked to us about the project that won the ICOM's first Sustainability Award, Young Islanders Drawing on Cultural Heritage, Traditional Ecological Knowledge, and Community Resilience to Shape Climate Justice for the Future. Youth leadership in climate action is a real thing, and museum-led co-production connects people across continents through transnational youth exchanges. Dr. Shreen Amin from Egypt explored the use of technology and AI to facilitate cross-cultural dialogue. the integration of new digital technologies into research and interpretation acts as a mediator, bridging the gap between historical legacy and contemporary global cooperation. Stephanie Grant then outlined how the British Council's Cultural Protection Fund supports cultural heritage protection by connecting museums through a people-centred, locally led, co-created approach. The fund supports projects protecting cultural heritage at risk from conflict and climate change. Session 4 explored the role of museums in conflicts, reconciliation and peace building. That was, for me, certainly a very emotional session. Michael Mohammed from France told us about the long-standing Mediterranean practice of sacred sites shared between different faiths. He presented a case study of a post-terrorist attack cross-country collaboration which provided a space for critical intercultural dialogue with a number of partners around the Mediterranean. Roshan Mishra then from Nepal reminded us how vulnerable cultural sites are to theft and destruction. Each successive conflict increases the vulnerability of heritage. He gave us ideas for solutions and examples of how museums can integrate risk preparedness, inclusive narratives, and collaborative restoration efforts and act as agents of peace building and cultural continuity through recovery and reconciliation. Yulia Naut from Ukraine presented a case study of a museum working with artists, communities, state institutions, and international partners during wartime to build a more equitable future. This work supports both artists and communities in memory and collective emotions and contributes to community building, so important in times of war. And then, super inspiring, Tristram reminded us that museums matter not in spite of geopolitics, but because of it. Objects cross borders before diplomats do, an important notion that I often forget. He laid out the case for the role of museums in supporting democratic structures. Museums make creative use of collections to create shared understanding, and despite perhaps lagging behind some other European countries, there have been some substantially symbolic restitutions from British museums to the originating communities in recent years. This builds trust between communities and countries, and is an important element of soft power. Now, ICOM's 5 missions include leading a diplomatic forum. Sasha describes museums as contact zones, social spaces where cultures meet and interact with each other. They're not the absolute authority as cultural and historical centers, but places of unfinished historical processes and changing conceptions. We heard many case studies today, lived examples and inspiration for others to follow. A lot of what we've been talking about today has to do with fairness and justice. We heard many examples of museums as places of dialogue, bringing communities together locally, regionally, and globally. Communities working together for reconciliation post-trauma, for climate justice, towards decoloniality. The power of museums is to bring people together, which is sometimes called soft power. But in this context, soft power also has a notion of political influence, often on the basis of country-to-country relationships, of seeking to influence others in parallel with economic and military power. There were some undertones of concerns today about political interference in museums, a different kind of power. We know that this is a real and ever-present risk for museums in most countries, and a reality in many places, as recent work by the Network of European Museum Organizations demonstrated. So just to finish off and move on, when we talk about cultural diplomacy here at this conference, we as museums mean the fostering of understanding and cooperation in communities and internationally. We mean making a positive difference to the lives of people, irrespective of political opinion, gender, skin color, religion. ICOM is one of those global organizations working actively to achieve this, and all of us here are an active part of this journey. So as we come to the end of the conference, on behalf of the trustees of ICOM UK, we'd like to take a moment to say thank you. First of all, to our keynote speakers, panelists, and moderators. Thank you for your insights, generosity, and the thoughtful discussions. Our sincere thanks also go to our headline sponsor, Art Fund, our travel bursary sponsors who have helped to bring our amazing international speakers here today, Barker Langham and the British Council, our conference partners, Nomad Exhibitions, Naura Associates, Delna Glass and TrueView, and finally our media partner, Blue Loop. Your support has helped make this event possible. Thank you to our conference organizing partners, the National Museum Directors Council, Barker Langham, and University of Oxford GLAM for their collaboration and support. We're very grateful to the venue team here at Oxford University Museum of Natural History and to the catering team at Taylor's for taking such good care of us. A special thank you to the ICOM UK Organising Committee, especially our conference coordinator, Hannah Tomlinson, and our two student helpers, Erin and Julia. Julia has been doing expert timekeeping here right in front of me all day. And the conference working group, and Dr. Sasha Prever, of course, who together worked through more than 140 submissions and helped shape the program and direction of this conference. And finally, thank you to all of you here in the room and online for attending, participating in discussions and contributing to the energy and ideas that have made this event so valuable. Before you leave, please take a few minutes to scan the QR codes. There we go. This is quite magic. To complete a short feedback form. Your feedback helps us learn what worked well and how we can continue to improve our conferences. Please do capture this now while you have an opportunity before that's missed, and please retain your name badges for tomorrow. That's really important. But kindly return your lanyards as you leave, because we would like to reuse those for next year. A very brief note about tomorrow. This will be more spread out with our AGM in the morning, followed by workshops at the Ashmolean, Pitt Rivers Museum and the Museum of Oxford, and then guided tours at Museum of Oxford, Pitt Rivers Museum, again Ashmolean, and the Museum of the History of Science, and guided walking tours departing from and returning to the Museum of Oxford. There is a reminder on the back of your badge of the activities you've booked for tomorrow. If you have any questions about your workshops or your bookings, need help with directions or anything else, please come and see us at the reception desk or call our conference coordinator, Hannah, whose phone number is in your delegate pack. Hannah will also be available at the Ashmolean Lecture Theatre all day tomorrow. We hope you will join us from 6 o'clock for the evening reception at the Ashmolean. This is a 10 to 15-minute walk from here, just across the road. There'll be canapes and drinks, you'll be delighted to hear. A couple of short speeches and an after-hours opening of the galleries exclusively for us. Thank you once again from both Maria and I on behalf of the ICOM UK Board of Trustees.